Hey Tere, welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Thompson, spinning yarns of good old American folk tales. Murder mysteries, wild adventures, and everything in between. Stick around for today's story, it's a doozy, so grab a seat. Back in the rugged days of 19th century Appalachia, there lived a fella named Ethan Caldwell. He was just an ordinary guy, nothing flashy about him on the surface. But the tale that unravels around Ethan? It's a strange winding mess of a story. One that folks still talk about around these parts today. Ethan's parents, Amos and Clara Caldwell, were dirt-poor farmers scraping by in the hills. Neither one could read or write their own names. Schooling wasn't in the cards for their generation. Still, they knew learning was the key to a better life. And no matter how wore out they were from plowing fields or how tight money got, those two old-timers pinched every nickel to send Ethan to a tutor down in the valley. Ethan didn't disappoint them neither. He stepped up big time. Cracking books was hard as hauling timber, no picnic at all. While the other kids were splashing in the creek or hunting crickets, Ethan didn't care if it was a frosty morning or a blistering afternoon. He stayed inside, studying by lantern light day after day. By 16, he'd earned himself a spot as a certified scholar at the county schoolhouse. That news had Amos and Clara over the moon. They couldn't stop grinning. Folks all over the holler started bragging about their boy, saying he was bound for big things. Some reckoned it was a miracle a hardscrabble family like theirs raised such a star, while others figured it was the luck of the Caldwell kin buried up on Pine Ridge. But for now, that scholar's badge was as high as he'd climbed. Ethan Caldwell's scholar days didn't last as sweet as they started. For years after getting that certificate, he kept bombing the exams to become a county judge. Folks around the hills started whispering and chuckling, said he'd peaked too soon. Amos and Clara, getting older and creakier by the day, felt their stomachs knot up tighter with every passing season. Ethan took those flops harder than a mule kick to the chest. That fire he'd had, bright, bold, and sure of himself, it flickered out. Now, sporting a tangled beart and a hangdog look. He moped around like a man who'd lost his last dollar. Amos and Clara locked eyes one evening, worry etched deep in their weathered faces. Their hearts were racing, but they knew the truth. Their big dreams of Ethan rising to the top were done for. So they dug into the tin can where they'd stashed years of hard-earned savings, set on finding him a wife, hoping to bounce a grandson on their knees before their time ran out. Ethan's new bride was a gal named Susanna Sue Taylor. She was a real beauty, graceful as a deer, with a warm smile that lit up a room, and curves that made folks do a double take. Who are down on highest like fella like isn't snake that catch likes you? That's a tale worth telling, and it's got some charm to it. Sue Taylor hailed from a family that had hit rock bottom a while back. They lived way out past the hollows, miles from any bustle or town, and she didn't cross paths with Ethan's kind much growing up. But Sue had always been sweet on poetry and old ballads, dreaming of tying the knot with a fella who'd read by candlelight. Someone thoughtful and sharp to share her nights with. Sue Taylor's folks were in a bind, but fate dealt her a wild card. One day, Ethan was feeling lower than a snake's belly, drowning his sorrows with a jug of moonshine down by the river. He started reciting some gloomy lines he'd scribbled, half poetry, half self-pity. Just then, Sue happened by with her cousin, strolling along the water's edge. She kaukt sich auf the ripples on the river. A breeze rustling the willows overhead. And there was Ethan brooding, sipping his liquor. Muttering verses like so melon is so troubadour. It was straight out of the dime novels she loved. And Sue's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help herself. Ethan might have been down, but he still had that scholar's air about him. Tall and wiry, with a quiet kind of grit. He cut a figure that matched Sue's dreams just right. They got to talking, and she was hooked. Here was the soul she'd been pining for, rough edges and all. Their chat was a breath of fresh air for Ethan too. Sue wasn't just pretty, she could talk circles around him, quoting lines from old songs and sketching scenes with words. Next to her, his loneliness didn't sting so bad. Before long, they were meeting up regular. Two young hearts wandering the riverbanks together. Things heated up quick, as they do with young folks. All that strolling and sweet-talking led where it shouldn't. Tee crosset allein von evening under the stars. When Sue's family caught wind of it, her pa flew into a rage, ready to skin Ethan alive. Sue's pa sent his hired hands to drag Ethan back and give him a thrashing. But Sue threw herself in front of them, fierce as a cornered bobcat. "Lay a hand on him, and you'll have to reckon with me first," she hollered. "If there's punishing to be done, take it out on me, I ain't ashamed." Her grit stopped them cold, but her pa was fit to be tied. Old man Taylor's temper boiled over. Smoke practically poured from his ears. He bellowed at Sue, calling her a disgrace. "Said dregetse familyname trug ze Mut." "If you're so set on that no-account Caldwell boy," he roared, "then you're no daughter of mine. Get out and don't come back." No matter how her pa raged, Sue wouldn't budge. She'd made up her mind. Ethan was her man, come hell or high water. Her stubbornness pushed her father to the edge. He spat blood in a fit and turned his back for good. So Sue walked away, head high, choosing love over kin. Sue got her wish and married isen Caldwell not long after. Ethan, for his part, was a stand-up fella. He cherished her something fierce once they tied the knot. Knowing Sue was a refined gal who'd never worked a hard day, he took on every chore himself, letting her sit pretty while he hauled wood or fetched water. Those first days as husband and wife were pure bliss. They'd tend the little farm together by day, then wander the riverbanks or climb the ridge at dusk, swapping stories about their pasts and laughing easy. It was a simple life, but it felt rich, like the world couldn't touch them up there in the hills. Folks say poor newlyweds don't stay honeymoon happy forever, and Ethan and Sue were no exception. After that first rosy spell, reality hit like a cold snap. Daily chores, chopping wood, fetching water, scraping by on beans and cornbread, started wearing on them, turning sweet moments into headaches. Sue took to pitching in, learning the ropes of farm life. She traded her daydreams for a hoe and a washboard. No longer the soft-handed gal she'd been. One day, staring at the last handful of meal in the barrel, she sighed, "We're out of corn again, Ethan. What are we gonna do?" Ethan set his book down and peeked into the barrel. Sure enough, it was near empty. He rubbed his temples, muttering, "Lord Almighty, this ain't good." After pacing a spell, he said, "Tomorrow I'll head into town. Sell some writin', letters or poems, whatever folks need. Maybe I can trade for some meal to tide us over." Sue nodded, but before she could say much, a coughing fit doubled her over, rough and ragged. Ethan jumped to her side, propping her up, patting her back as she hacked worse and worse. When he saw blood speckle her hand, he bolted out the door, hollering for the town doc. Doc Harper came quick, but his face turned sour as he checked Sue over. "She's frail as a reed, Ethan," he said, shaking his head. "Too much work's run her down. Her lungs ain't holding up." He scribbled a tonic recipe and handed it over. But Ethan froze. He didn't have a dime to his name for medicine. Ethan scratched his head, sheepish, figuring he'd beg Doc Harper for credit. But Sue cut in, voice weak, "Ethan, wait. There's some coins in my jewelry box, for my old hairpins. Take 'em and pay the doc quick." Ethan dashed over, heart sinking as he found just a few measly nickels. He clenched those coins tight, handed them to Doc Harper, and got the tonic back home lickety-split. Ethan spooned it to Sue gentle-like, but she coughed it right back up, wheezing worse than before. He set the bowl down, eyes stinging, feeling helpless as a drowned rat. "I can't watch you suffer like this no more," Ethan said, voice cracking. "This year, I'm taking the judge exam again. I've got to." "You deserve a better than this hard life with me." Sue looked up, soft as ever. "You're enough, Ethan. I'm happy here with you, hard times or not." Ethan shook his head. "No, Sue, you will stuck by me truke ver flop. Ain't been a single good day for you since we wed. For you, I'm trying again. I'll make it this time, I swear." Sue's eyes welled up, and she squeezed his hand tight. "I'm with you, Ethan. I believe in you." With that, Ethan made up his mind and got to work. Every night, he burned the midnight oil, poring over law books and dusting off old notes he'd tossed aside. Days turned to weeks, and Sue perked up just enough to see him off. He packed a sack with bread and a pencil, heading for the county seat. Ethan's trek to the county seat wasn't no Sunday stroll. He hoofed it over 30 miles of rough trails, through thickets and hollers, for over a month. With no cash to spare, he bunked in an old abandoned barn. scratching out letters for folks in town to earn a bite to eat. When he wasn't scribbling for pennies, Ethan hit the books hard. He'd read by the flicker of a stubby candle, propped against hay bales, till his eyes burned. Sue was back home waiting, frail but rooting for him. And that kept his nose in those pages, no matter how tired he got. After 3 months of grit and grind, the big day rolled around. The exam proctor barked out the rules. And Ethan's stomach churned. He knew the stakes were sky high. But when he cracked open the paper and skimmed the questions, a grin crept up. He reckoned he could ace this one. Ethan scratched out his answers quick and clean, finishing early and eyeballing his work with a nod. He figured he'd nailed it, thought he'd be writing home a judge. But life's got a way of throwing curveballs, and this one was about to knock him flat. 2 days later, Ethan crowded round the courthouse with the rest, waiting for the results to get pinned up. When he saw the list, his heart stopped. There was a name mighty close to Ethan Caldwell at the top, but it wasn't his. The rest of the board? Not a trace of him nowhere. Ethan Caldwell's legs turned to jelly right there in the dusty square outside the Virginia courthouse. He'd missed the mark, not even good enough to scrape the bottom of the list. Guess that's my lot, he muttered, waving off the whole mess like a bad dream. The fight had drained clean out of him. And he trudged off, a broken man headed back to his little cabin in the Virginia hills. That long walk home sucked the last spark from Ethan's soul. He stumbled along like a ghost, boats kicking up red clay. No clue how many days it took till he saw his own porch. When he did, a flicker of life sparked. He dusted himself off, called out, "Sue, I'm back." But the silence hit him like a hammer. Ethan hollered for Sue till his throat went raw, but no answer came. She must have stepped out, he reckoned, pacing the yard. Then he spotted Widow Jenkins hobbling up the path, her face all pinched. "Ethan, you're home," she said, voice shaky. He perked up. "Widow, you seen Sue? Where's she at?" "Widow Jenkins said heavy. Ethan, I hatte to be the one. Sue's gone. Passed on not long after you left. Us folks in the hollow pitched in to bury her proper. Ethan's had buzzed like a swarm of hornets." Sue's dead kept ringing in his ears, loud and awful. And he couldn't shake it loose no matter how he tried. "You're pulling my leg, ain't you?" Ethan croaked, tears choking him up. "I was only gone 4 months. How's my Sue dead?" Widow Jenkins shook her head. "It's true, son. She took a turn for the worse right quick after you headed out. By the time we found her, she'd been gone a spell. Ask anyone round here if you don't believe me." Ethan komplett reitere in the yard, knees sinking into the Virginia mood. "I'm sorry, Sue," he wailed, voice cracking like dry timber. His mind spun with every memory, her laugh, her touch, and he let out a howl that rattled the pines, bringing neighbors running from their cabins. Folks gathered round, faces tight with pity and worry. Ethan looked up, wild-eyed. "Tell me it's a lie. Y'all are joshing me. Sue's fine, ain't she?" An old-timer coughed and stepped forward. "It's true, Ethan. Her grave's up yonder, near her folks' plot. Go see for yourself if you need to." Ethan roared, "No, I won't believe it," and took off running, stumbling through the brush toward the burying ground. There it was, a fresh mound with Susanna Taylor Caldwell carved rough on a stone. He dropped like a felled oak, clawing at the dirt, screaming, "You can't leave me, Sue, not like this." Blood trickled from Ethan's scraped-up hands as he tore at the earth. Hollering, "I never got to say goodbye. You didn't see me make good. What kind of wife quits on me?" The neighbors trailed after him, yanking him back. "Ethan, stop. She's gone. Don't tear yourself apart over it." They hauled Ethan home just as the sky split open, dumping rain like it was crying right along with him. It soaked him through, cold as his heart felt, and they left him slumped on the porch. He passed out there, lost in a haze of grief and whiskey fumes. Ethan woke up groggy, sprawled on the porch floorboards. No telling how long he'd been out. He let out a long, ragged breath and hauled himself up, grabbing a jug of corn liquor from the shelf. 5 days straight he'd been back, and every one of them he spent pouring whiskey down his throat. Ethan rattled the jug, empty again, and smashed it on the ground in a fit. He curled up, sobbing like a lost child, then staggered to his feet, rummaging for anything to trade. He dug out a couple of threadbare shirts, figuring he'd swap 'em in town for more hooch to keep the pain at bay. Ethan wobbled down the path to the tavern.
Ah sorry, sicht in dem Virginia Don.
He shoved his raggedy shirts at old man Lester behind the bar, who just stared, face creased with something like sorrow. Keep your shirts, Ethan, Lester said, sliding over a full jug.
This onus on son.
Ethan clutched the liquor and shuffled home, sinking into a chair with nothing left but the bottle.
Hesvig deb, lost in a folk, vena squeak kut truxequit.
He squinted toward the sound. A big shiny black rat sat there, eyeballing him like an old friend.
Isen let out a de lauk. Well, il be blackjack, you little vamint.
That rat had been sneaking around since him and Sue first set up house. A bold critter that had swiped crumbs right off their table. Back then, Sue'd stopped Ethan from braining it with a poker, saying, "He's just hungry, let him be." Now here it was again, like it owned the place. Ethan took another slug of whiskey, eyeing that rat with a lopsided grin. "Ain't no crumbs left here, Black Jack," he slurred.
Sueskone, and the pantries bare. You revast in your time.
The rat sniffed around the empty meal barrel, then scampered up to Ethan's table, nosing at his liquor jug. Black Jack stretched out, lapped at the whiskey, then reared back, shaking its head like it had bit into a pepper. Ethan cackled, "Told you little fool. That's man's drink, not critter brew." But his laugh died quick, eyes locking on something tangled in the rat's hind leg. Ethan lunged, snagging Black Jack and prying at the knot. He pulled free a scrap of red ribbon, worn but familiar, and his breath caught. It was Sue's hair tie from their wedding night. She'd woven it herself, threading a bit of gold thread through it, saying, "This binds us forever, Ethan, ain't no breaking it." Ethan's hands shook as he stared at that ribbon. Mind racing, how'd it end up on a dang rat? "Black Jack," he rasped, "did somebody tie this to you? If you can hear me, take me to him, please." He jostled the rat desperate, till it squeaked and wriggled free. Black Jack darted out the door, and Ethan stumbled after.
Whiskey hatze clearing like folk in the wind.
"Slow down, you blasted rodent," he yelled, chasing it through the Virginia dusk, legs pumping hard. 10 miles later, lungs burning, he watched it slip into a fancy estate down the road.
Isen stopped it, panting, as Black Jack vanished into the shadows of the Tucker plantation.
He knew this spread, 10 miles from his hollow. It was the talk of the county. Owned by Silas Tucker, a big-shot trader who'd struck it rich shipping tobacco. It didn't seem tied to Sue at all, yet that ribbon gnawed at him.
Isen crept closer, eyeing the stern gwarts at the gate.
No way he'd talk his way past him looking like a drowned drunk. He circled round to the back, scaling a low stone wall, and dropped into the yard, heart thumping like a war drum. Then he heard it, a woman's cry and a man's harsh bark. Peeking through a busted shed window, Ethan froze. There was Silas Tucker, red-faced and raging, slapping a gal who looked awful familiar, Sue, alive and trembling.
"Jure mine, girl, isavet your hide."
Silas snarled, grabbing at her while she dodged, tears streaking her face. Ethan's blood boiled over, Sue alive, and that snake Tucker laying hands on her?
"He cresche truxe val, hollering, stop, you filthy dog. Get away from my wife."
Silas and Sue whipped around, stunned, and Sue gasped, "Ethan?
How'd you, get out, I cause this."
Silas sneered, "Who's this tramp bustin' into my house? Guards, grab this fool." Footsteps thundered as 3 burly men piled in.
"Pinning isen tuse dir in a heartbeat."
Sue threw herself at Silas, begging, "Let him go, please. I'll do whatever you want, just don't hurt him." Silas Tucker smirked, looming over Ethan pinned in the dirt. "Well now, ain't this a treat, her deadbeat husband, I reckon? Heard you went off chasing judge robes and flopped again." He cackled, "Guess you're too late, boy, she's mine now."
Isen threshed, roaring, "Who are you bastard?
Let me up." Ethan's mind spun like a top. Folks said Sue was dead, buried and gone. Yet here she was, breathing and begging for him. He glared at Silas. "What's this game?"
"She's my wife, let her go. Silas just laukhet, heaven didst want you, and hell spit you back. Time to thee, you sorry fool."
Silas waved a hand, and his men laid into Ethan hard. Fists and boots rained down, cracking ribs and splitting skin, till he was gasping, half-conscious in the muck. Sue screamed, "Stop it! I'll stay, don't kill him, I'll do anything." She lunged at Silas, sinking her teeth into his arm like a wildcat. Silas yelped, backhanding Sue so hard she hit the ground. "You little wench," he bellowed, nursing his bloody arm. "Beat 'em both. Finish this mess." The guards closed in, fists raised.
Wen ashut brok trug?
"Trouble, boss. Rats, hundreds of them."
From the dark came a shivering tide. Rats swarmed the yard.
Gnashing and clawing at Silas's men like a biblical plague. The guards howled, flailing as the critters chewed through ropes.
Freeing isen ensue in the chaos. A pass clear trug the swarm, and isen grab bet sue, bolting for the wall. Isen hoisted sue over the plantation wall.
Rats nipping at their heels, till they hit the open road. He didn't stop running till the Tucker place was a speck behind him. Then collapsed with her in his arms, both shaking like leaves in a storm. Sue sobbed into his chest, clinging tight as the night closed in. Ethan held her close, stroking her hair till she could speak. "Tell me, Sue, what happened?" he whispered, half dreading the answer. She wiped her eyes, voice trembling. "It was Silas Tucker. A month after you left, I got sicker, went looking for a doc myself. Ran smack into him coming back from some low-down carousing." Sue's lip quivered as she went on. "He saw me weak and poorly. Took a shine to me right then, the rotten snake. I told him off fierce, but he wouldn't quit. Barged into our place with his men, dragged me off to his plantation. Said he'd save me, cured me up just to keep me like some prize. I fought him tooth and nail," Sue said, eyes blazing. "Every time he got close, I'd threatened to end it, kept him at bay. But he wore me down, Ethan, made me think you'd never come back. Then you showed up today, and I near lost my mind. We almost both died cause of me."
Ethan's jaw clenched, fury bubbling up like a still gone hot.
"That son of a gun ain't getting away with this," he growled. "I'll see him pay, Sue, mark my words." Just then, a squeak piped up. Black Jack perched on the grass, looking smug as if he'd orchestrated the whole dang rescue. Ethan blinked at Black Jack, then busted out a weary grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Thank you, you scrappy little cuss. Never thought that kindness we showed you'd come back to save us." Sue managed a faint smile. "Much obliged, Black Jack."
"You're a better friend than most folks round here."
Back at the plantation, Silas Tucker was pacing like a penned bull, face white as a sheet and breath heaving. His men stumbled in, rat-bit and rattled, reporting the swarm was gone. And so were Ethan and Sue. Silas slammed a fist on the table. "Find him. I ain't done with that pair yet."
Word of Sue's return spread through the hollow like wildfire. Folks crowded round Ethan's cabin, wide-eyed and yappering. Widow Jenkins piped up, "Sue, hore you here? ULL bring Tuckers right down on us all."
"That man's got pull messin' with him's a death sentence." Another voice chimed in, "Tucker's a terror, Sue. You be in his fancies, a blessing we can't afford to lose."
"Wir habsilon de Joran?"
"Now we're all in the stew." The crowd grumbled, pushing Sue to go back, their fear of Silas outweighing any shred of backbone. Ethan kicked the cabin door wide, face red with fury. "Listen here, you yellow-bellied lot, I've respected y'all too long. You'd sell my wife to that devil, 'cause you're scared? Your lives matter, but hers don't?"
"Tats hogwash. Be damned if he let you turn on us." The crowd shuffled, heads hanging low-es isen glaret, down.
Widow Jenkins mumbled, "Ain't that we don't care, Ethan. Tucker came through here after he took Sue. Swore he'd burn us out if we breathed a word. He's got the law in his pocket. We're stuck, son." Ethan spat in the dirt. "So y'all lied, said she was dead to save your own hides? That's lower than a snake's belly. I thought this hollow had some grit, but you're just scared rabbits." His words stung, and the folks slunk back, knowing they'd traded honor for safety. Before Ethan could say more, a ruckus kicked up down the lane. Silas Tucker rode in, flanked by a posse of roughnecks. Hollering, "Where are they at?"
"You can't hide from me."
He spotted Ethan and Sue, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. "This here's my turf, you're done running." Silas swung down from his horse, barking orders.
Grab that sorry cuss and tie the gal up. I want her back. We'll string him up right here. Show these fools what happens.
Wen you cross Silas Tucker.
He started shucking his coat, wild-eyed, ready to make a bloody spectacle for all to see, just as Silas's men lunged for Ethan.
A Klemmer of Hoves and Hollering echoed ab the Ritsche.
The crowd spun round, spooked, and saw a troop of militiamen charging in, sabers glinting and drums thumping like thunder. The militia captain reined up sharp, dust swirling round his boots, and bellowed, "Who's Ethan Caldwell in this rabble?" Ethan shoved past Silas's men, bruised but standing tall. "That's me, sir. What's this about?" The captain grinned. "Kneel, boy, you've got a proclamation coming." Ethan dropped to one knee, head spinning, as the captain unfurled a parchment and read loud. By order of the Commonwealth, Ethan Caldwell topped the judge's exam. A clerk's fool error listed the wrong name. He's hereby appointed county magistrate, effective now.
Silas Tuckers Jav hitzediert.
And his posse wilted like wet straw as the news sank in. Ethan stood, dazed, while the captain clapped him on the back.
You raise low here now, Caldwell. Sorry, boots a mix-up.
The hollow folks gaped, their fear of Silas crumbling fast. Ethan didn't waste a breath, clutching his new magistrate seal. He pointed at Silas. "Arrest that man. He's guilty of kidnapping, assault, and terrorizing this county. I'll see him swing for it." The militia hauled Silas off, his curses fading into the wind. Ethan and Sue packed up quick, moving to the county seat, leaving that hollow of cowards behind for good. He took to his magistrate duties like a hound to a scent, and with Sue by his side, they became folk heroes. Honest and fair, the kind Virginia sorely needed. Silas Tucker didn't go quiet. His trial was the talk of Virginia. Ethan laid out the charges clear as day: kidnapping Sue, beating folks senseless, and running crooked deals with tobacco smugglers. The court didn't blink, sentenced him and his kin to the gallows, wiping the Tucker name off the map for good. Less than a year into Ethan's magistrate gig, word trickled in from the old hollow. A flood had roared through, drowning half the village. Folks who'd turned on Sue were among the lost. And Ethan couldn't help but sigh, wondering if fate had settled a score. Ethan and Sue settled into county life, ruling the courtroom and home with steady hands.
Folks started killing the parents of the people.
Always looking out for the little guy. Their story spreading through Virginia like a fireside yarn worth retelling. And that's the tale of Ethan and Sue Caldwell, folks. A love cursed by hardship, redeemed by grit and a touch of the uncanny. Nancy Thompson signing off this one. But don't you fret, I've got another yarn ready to spin. Stick round for the next chapter. Now, for you listeners who liked this ride.
Nancy Scott a second story breving. The Baker's Widow and the Drunken Rouge.
It's a wild one about a gal selling pies, a scoundrel with a dark streak, and a beggar who sees doom coming. Tune in tomorrow. Hey there, folks. Nancy Thompson back with another Virginia yarn. This one's called The Baker's Widow and the Drunken Rogue. A twisty tale of pies, heartbreak, and a touch of fate. Settle in, 'cause we're headed to the bustling little town of Laurel Creek, right in the heart of old Virginia's rolling hills. Down in Laurel Creek lived a gal named Mary Ellen Harper, born to Tom and Sadie Harper in the early 1800s. Tom was a blacksmith, hammering out horseshoes, while Sadie kept the hearth warm and the kids fed. When Mary Ellen was 2, her little brother Jimmy came along, and life was sweet as molasses for that happy clan. By the time Mary Ellen hit 6, it was 1810, and Laurel Creek was gearing up for the annual harvest fair. Tom hauled the whole family into town. Lanterns swinging, fiddles wailing, and the air thick with cider and cheer. They figured it'd be a night to remember. But none of them saw the dark cloud creeping in. The Harpers wandered to the fair's heart, where a peddler's stall gleamed with trinkets, wooden charms carved with critters, from deer to snakes. Mary Ellen begged for one, and Sadie picked out a deer for her. A snake for Jimmy, tying him round their necks with a smile. But while Tom paid up, Jimmy slipped off, 6 years old and gone in a blink. Tom and Sadie tore through the crowd, hollering for Jimmy. But the fair was a sea of folks. Finding a kid was like chasing smoke. They searched till dawn, hearts sinking lower with every step, then dragged themselves to the sheriff, begging for help. Days passed with no sign, and Sadie took it hard. Fell sick and faded away, leaving Tom and Mary Ellen alone. After Sadie passed, Tom Harper turned quiet as a ghost, shouldering the loss of Jimmy and his wife like a millstone. His blacksmith hammer swung slower each day, and his health started slipping, grief eating him from the inside. Mary Ellen, just a slip of a girl, stepped up to keep the house running, earning a name round Laurel Creek as a dutiful daughter. By the time Mary Ellen hit 17, she'd blossomed, pretty as a spring laurel, with a kind heart to match. Fellas from all over came knocking, hats in hand. But she turned them down flat, focused on her pa. 2 years back, Tom had fixed her up with a match. A decent boy named Jack Riley, set to be her future. Jack Riley was a year older than Mary Ellen. Hailing from Pine Hollow, a stone's throw from Laurel Creek, his folks had handed down a pie-baking trade. He ran a little shop in town, dishing out apple and pecan pies. Jack was a good egg, honest and steady, and folks liked him well enough to keep his oven hot. Tom was tickled pink when Jack asked for Mary Ellen's hand. Set a wedding date faster than you could say hallelujah. With kin and neighbors looking on, they tied the knot under a big oak, and the newlyweds settled into a love as warm as Jack's pies, stuck tight like dough to a rolling pin. 2 weeks into married life, Mary Ellen got restless at home. "I want to help at the shop, Jack," she said, itching to share the load with her man. Jack hemmed and hawed. Pie-making was sweaty work, and he didn't want her worn out, but she wouldn't hear no. So he caved, and she dove in with both hands. Mary Ellen took to pie-making like a duck to water. In under a year, she was rolling dough and mixing fillings. Better than Jack ever had, even with his 2 years under his pa's wing. He'd shake his head and grin, "You're a natural, darlin'. I reckon you could outbake me blindfolded." One late night, the couple trudged home from the shop, bone-tired but happy, arms full of leftover pies. They found Tom sprawled in the yard, twitching and pale. A fit had seized him out of nowhere. Jack bolted for the dock, but by sunup he hadn't come back. And Tom slipped away despite Mary Ellen's desperate tending. Mary Ellen was still reeling from her pa's death, when a neighbor, Pete Dawson, burst in, tears streaking his dirt-smudged face. "Mary Ellen, it's Jack. He fell into a hunter's trap out in the woods last night. Got skewered bad, body's just outside." She crumpled, sobbing till she fainted, losing her pa and husband in one cruel swoop. Kind folks helped bury Tom and Jack up on the ridge, leaving Mary Ellen alone in a house too big and quiet. Tongues wagged in Laurel Creek, some called her cursed, a widow-maker who doomed her menfolk. They shunned her, whispering she brought death wherever she went. But Mary Ellen gritted her teeth and held her head high. Mary Ellen couldn't bear to let Jack's pie shop die with him. Brushing off the gossip, she fired up the ovens herself, baking through the pain to keep his memory alive. 2 summers later, she was kneading dough one morning, when a rowdy crew rolled up to her shop, looking more like trouble than customers. Mary Ellen wiped flour from her hands and squinted at the gang piling into her shop. Big fellas, decked out in loud vests and patched trousers. They didn't look like the usual pie-buying sort. "What's your business, boys?" she asked, voice steady but wary. A slick figure stepped forward, and her stomach did a flip. She knew him. It was Wade Carver, son of Old Man Carver, a rich fella who'd made his pile running a trading post downriver. Wade was a strapping sort, handsome as sin, with a silver tongue. But word round Laurel Creek pegged him as a no-good scoundrel. He'd been sniffing round her shop for months. And now here he was, grinning like he owned the place. Wade's pa had spoiled him rotten growing up. And when the old man kicked the bucket a couple years back, Wade took the family cash and ran wild. He'd opened a saloon and a gambling den in town, raking in coin from every vice the sheriff turned a blind eye to. A rogue with a knack for trouble and a charm that stuck like honey. Wade had first clapped eyes on Mary Ellen one day, while passing her shop, craving a slice of her famous pecan pie. One look at her, fiery hair, steady hands, and a spark in her eye, and he was smitten, hooked like a fish on a line. He'd been dropping by ever since, tossing compliments her way, even hinting he'd make her his wife if she'd have him. Mary Ellen had warmed to Wade some over time. His easy talk and rare kindness softened her guard a touch.
But then she'd seen him one day out front of the dry goods store, watching cold as his cronies roughed up old man Tate over a debt. When Tate dropped dead from the beating, Wade just shrugged and hauled off Tate's daughter to sell. And that chilled Mary Ellen to the bone. Wade sauntered up to Mary Ellen's counter, his crew fanning out like they were staking a claim. "You're cramping my trade, Wade," she snapped, hands on hips. "Tell your boys to scat, I ain't in the mood." He flashed a grin. "I brought him to cheer you up, darlin'. Give us a show, and if you don't like it, I'll fetch a new one tomorrow." Wade waved his gang to start some fool jig. But Mary Ellen wasn't having it. She stormed over, cracking her flour-dusted hand across his cheek with a smack that echoed. The crowd outside froze, jaws dropping, knowing Wade Carver didn't take kindly to a public shaming. He blinked, stunned, then growled low as his boys backed off. Wade slunk away, and Mary Ellen worked late, locking up the shop under a moonlit sky. Heading home through the pines, she felt eyes on her back. Wade, trailing her like a hound, same as he'd done for weeks. He'd sworn it was to keep her safe on them dark trails. But after that slap, she figured he might be stewing for payback. Halfway home, a rustle turned her round. Wade stumbled out, reeking of rot-gut whiskey, eyes glassy and mean. Before she could bolt, he tackled her to the grass, pinning her down with a leer, too liquored up to care. Mary Ellen thrashed, but he was stronger, and in that lonely stretch of woods, her cries went unheard. Wade forced himself on her, and when it was done, Mary Ellen shoved him off, slapping him again, till her hand stung. He sobered up quick, staring at the mess he'd made, then dropped to his knees, blubbering, "I'm sorry, Mary Ellen. I didn't mean it." She just wept, pulling herself together, too heartsick to speak. Wade staggered off into the dark, leaving Mary Ellen crumpled in the grass. A scrawny figure shuffled up, voice soft, "Ma'am, you all right?" She looked up through tears at a ragged beggar boy, barely a man, with a deer charm dangling round his neck. "No harm done," she lied, brushing dirt off her torn skirt. The boy sighed, "I should have come sooner, heard you yell but nodded off. I'm sorry I was late." Mary Ellen nodded, then froze. That deer charm was the twin to Jimmy's, the one her ma gave him at the fair all those years back. "Where'd you get that?" she demanded, grabbing his arm. The beggar flinched. "My ma gave it to me when I was 6. Lost her and my folks not long after." "What's your name?" Mary Ellen pressed, heart pounding. "Folks call me whatever, but I reckon it was Jimmy Harper once," he said. She gasped, "Jimmy? My brother, it's you," and pulled him into a fierce hug. Jimmy hugged her back, dazed but melting into her arms, both crying out years of hurt under them Virginia pines. When they caught their breath, Jimmy's eyes turned hard. "I saw what that bastard did, sis. I'll make him pay. Wade Carver's a dead man come tomorrow, mark me." Mary Ellen's gut twisted, relief at finding Jimmy warring with dread. "You know him? Wade?" she asked, shaky. "Everybody knows that snake, gambling, whoring, ruining folks," Jimmy spat. "Don't do nothin' rash," she begged. "We just got each other back. I can't lose you again." Jimmy softened, seeing Mary Ellen's worry-carved lines in her face. "Don't fret, sis. I ain't got the means to take on Wade myself. Just talkin' big to ease you some," he said, patting her hand. "Come home with me tonight. We've got years to catch up on." She nodded, clinging to hope they could start fresh. "I can't tonight," Jimmy added quick. "Got some gear to round up first. I'll swing by tomorrow evening, swear it." Mary Ellen hesitated. His eyes flickered odd, but she relented. "All right, but no funny business, Jimmy. Be at my place tomorrow, or I'll hunt you down myself." Mary Ellen trudged home alone, tossing all night with dreams of Jimmy and nightmares of Wade. She skipped the pie shop next day, bustling round the house instead, fixing up a bed for her brother and baking a welcome spread, determined to hold on to this miracle kin. By nightfall, Jimmy still hadn't shown, and a bad feeling gnawed at Mary Ellen's gut. She stepped out at dawn, asking round Laurel Creek, and heard a whisper, "Wade Carver got jumped by outlaws last night. Left dead in a ditch outside town." Her knees buckled, dread sinking in like cold mud. Mary Ellen raced to the sheriff's office, where folks buzzed about the killing. Word was,
The outlaws got nabbed fleeing, caught in a scrap with deputies and hauled in. The county was set to hang him that night at the market square. A public reckoning to show Laurel Creek meant business. By dusk, Laurel Creek's market square was packed tighter than a barrel of nails. Folks craning necks to see the gallows lit by flickering torches. Mary Ellen pushed through, heart hammering, dreading what she might find. 3 figures knelt on the platform, heads bowed. And there, in the middle, was Jimmy Harper. Mary Ellen's breath caught, tears spilling as she locked eyes with her brother. Jimmy glanced up, face grim but steady. No hint of regret in his stare. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Just watched, helpless, as the hangman readied the noose. Knowing she'd lost him again after one fleeting day, the sheriff barked the charges, murder and robbery, and the crowd roared approval as the ropes snapped tight. Jimmy and the other 2 swung, quick and final. A warning to any rogue thinking Laurel Creek was soft. Mary Ellen turned away, choking on sobs. The weight of it all crushing her like a millstone. Wade and the outlaws got no kin to claim him. So the sheriff's men carted the bodies out past town. Mary Ellen trailed behind in secret, digging up Jimmy and Wade's corpses from the hasty grave. She found a quiet spot under a lone cedar, burying them separate, her hands trembling with every spadeful. At Wade's grave, Mary Ellen whispered, "You were rotten, Wade. But I know you cared some, in your twisted way. We weren't wed, but we shared something. I've laid you to rest now, so be better next time round." Then at Jimmy's she wept, "I failed you, little brother. I'll visit, I swear, till I'm in the ground too." 2 months after the hanging, Mary Ellen noticed a change. Her belly started swelling, a secret growing from that awful night with Wade. She lit up inside, a flicker of joy amid the sorrow. But fretted too, folks talk, call her kid a bastard. And she couldn't bear more cold stares from Laurel Creek. Mary Ellen made up her mind, no more whispers or pity. She sold the pie shop, packed her few things, and slipped away to a far-off Virginia hamlet where no one knew her name. A year later, she birthed a chubby boy, and the 2 of them carved out a quiet, happy life, free from the shadows of the past. And that's the end of the baker's widow and the drunken rogue, folks. A tale of loss, rage, and a redemption hard won. Nancy Thompson here, hoping you savored this Virginia yarn. It's all my own spinning, no copying here, just pure storytelling. To shine a light on grit, goodness, and moving on. This here's fiction, mind you. Characters and twists pulled straight from my head. Not some old superstition to cling to. It's meant to stir your heart, maybe nudge you toward kindness, and keep them old Virginia ways alive in spirit, not folly. If this tale tickled your fancy, drop me a holler below. Let me know what you think. Give a nod to the channel, share it round, and keep your ears peeled for more stories coming your way. Thanks for riding along, y'all. Till next time.